Hi, it's Dr. Casoni. I've got some very exciting news. I've been talking about online courses, and we are getting very close to launching a few of them. And we have our own app that is in the works, and it will be available on Android and Apple. And this app is going to allow for a community experience, and it will host our online courses. The first one is going to be a course on the Reset Food Plan. For those of you who are doing the plan or who have done the plan, who are interested in the plan, this course will be for you, and it's at no cost. So in that course, I made a section on food addiction, and that's where this video comes from. So I thought I would also share it to whoever else wants to watch this section of the online course. I hope you enjoy. Before we get started on the Reset Food Plan, I want to cover the topic of food addiction. Now, this topic does affect everybody nowadays. For some of us, it affects us more, and for others, less. However, due to the addictive nature of the modern day foods and the specific and intentional ingredients and excitatory agents that they put into foods, the manufacturers, to make it addictive, all of us at some point have to take a stand and battle that war of food addiction. And so I want to cover that just for a brief moment. Now, if you don't have any problem with this at all, and all you need is information about how to eat better, and you want to get on with the Reset Food Plan, then jump ahead to the next step. However, for others where you struggle with food and you're not even sure if you can do the Reset Food Plan, and the last thing you want is to fail, then I want you to listen to this short segment. Okay, so food addiction is really going to be described as having a biological withdrawal mechanism. That's kind of how conventional care views it. That means, like, if I stop drinking coffee, which I love coffee, and I get a headache or low energy, that would be considered an addiction. But I'm going to propose a much more useful definition of addiction, and it's got two components. The first component is going to be loss of control, referred to as compulsion. And so what that means is that you say you're not going to do something, and then you do it anyways. You say you're not going to have a certain food, and then you have it anyways. Or you even have an excessive amount. So once you start having it, you lose control of the amounts that you have. That would be one of the major components of addiction. The second one is that there's a progressing negative consequence. So this means that, like, you're gaining weight, there may be a health concern. If you're in care with chronic conditions under our care, then that means that there is a bigger picture we're trying to treat. And even though there is a chronic condition affected by diet, you still are having a hard time changing the diet. So the loss of control plus that progressive negative consequence, those two themes are very important for our definition of addiction. So you can think of it like, for example, sex addiction or alcohol addiction or something like that. We tend to think of frequency and quantity. If there's a sex addict, they must be having sex with a ton of people and all over the place. Well, that's not the case. That person might be immoral. I don't know. It's not my place to judge them. However, they may not be suffering it as an addiction. So if we look through it through our lens of those two factors, then the addiction would be if they lose control. They don't want to do what they do, and they do it anyways. And then there's a negative consequence. A good example would be somebody ends up sleeping with their best friend's boyfriend or something like that. So they lost control. They did something they didn't want to do because they lose control. And then there was a horrible negative consequence with a guilt shame cycle. So you could have alcohol every night. It may not be good for you. You might indeed be medicating for something that we need to treat. However, it doesn't mean that there's alcoholism or addiction. However, the person who might not be having any alcohol, but when they do, they drink to oblivion. When they decided not to, they're going to finally have a drink. I'm only going to have one drink. And then they end up drinking to blackout or something like that. And then maybe they get in a car accident. Maybe they have decided this is so destructive, they're never going to do it, yet only to find that they do it again the very next week or month or something like that. So it's not frequency, quantity, it's loss of control plus extreme or higher or progressing negative consequence. So with that in mind, some of us have that with food. I know that I did. I suffered tremendously with huge cravings for sugar. And I ended up getting sugar and sweets out of my diet about 15 years ago as the making of this video. And it wasn't for health reasons. The reason I did it was because I had lost control. And I would tell myself I'm not going to have any cookies. And then I would end up having one, and then I would binge. And I would actually binge. I would overeat to where I was stuffed and I was confused. And it was very demoralizing considering that I was in the field of health and I owned a gym and I had degrees in nutrition, which only made the guilt and shame even more. We call that the spiritual side of it, right? There's a spiritual sickness there as well. But we have to understand there's also a physical component to most food addictions. And Reset Food Plan is going to fix a lot of that. Later on, I'm going to add a video to educate you about the apostat, which controls our cravings. And the Reset Food Plan does correct that. So I have cravings for sugars and sweets. I got that out of my diet 100%. I no longer have any cravings. It's like the spell has been broken. But I could still have cravings for a lot of carbohydrate foods. If my apostat is corrected, then I can visit the land of tacos, for example, which has tortillas, which I love, and I don't overeat, and I don't crave more going into the next few days. If my apostat is challenged or broken, could be because I've been having too many of those types of foods. What will start to happen is I will overeat, and then I will also have a hard time creating boundaries. So now that I'm overeating, I want to cut down, but I'm struggling to cut down. All of that is a physiological challenge. We mistakenly often think that it's a willpower challenge, but it's not. We can actually correct those cravings through the Reset Food Plan. So I want you to understand that going into this, that if you have those food addiction tendencies, this plan is right for you. And on top of that, if you're under the care of our team or myself, I will be following your treatment plan and adjusting the protocol, which is custom herbal formulas and or clinical nutrition that is also aimed at treating some of the areas that contribute to this. So the other part of addiction is, of course, our mindset. Right? The more we stress, the more we're upset, the more we find ourselves needing to medicate with something. And so this goes back into one of the basic concepts of addiction. And you see the 12-step work. Some of the more successful programs are really looking at our spiritual health. And the simplest way to frame this is to look at it as the study of personal power. Right? So on one side of the equation is how we connect to our source of power. If you have a faith, then that's going to probably be some version of God and Jesus connecting us to God and etc. However, anybody can frame it in a way where that power source is something bigger than them. And the connection to that power is generally going to have the experience of meaning, purpose, passion, creativity, inspiration, intuition, clarity, and genuine service to others. Those themes show up, even though it shows up differently for each individual. I believe that is the voice of God in us. And what happens when we're in the clutches of an addiction is that we have lost that power, right? So the God-powered aspect is really part of saving us from the addiction, right? So we want to have more of that, but you have to learn to listen to where that voice is showing up in your life. And typically we start saying no to it because we're focused on how we lose power or evil, right? If we frame this as spiritual versus psychological, It's not based on an early childhood trauma. It's based on a battle between good and evil within the individual, right? Kind of like the motifs of the angel and the devil on the shoulder. So, how we're gaining power through our connection to the divine, how we're losing that power. And that could be the ego, if you don't want to frame it as good and evil, the ego works. Or if you call it some sort of evil, it's really leading us to self-absorption. And so here's how that shows up. It's going to show up with all the things of the world, but it's going to have the themes of fear, insecurity, resentment, frustration, self-criticism that leads to guilt and shame, worry. All of those themes show up different per individual. However, they are going to take you away from the sunlight of the spirit. The more you manage what you're suffering, the more you're focused on self. And then there's no creativity at all. And so the challenge here with addiction is to create a daily practice where you're simply looking at where you're upset. Where are you having the power loss show up? And the practice would be journal writing or meditating or praying. My favorite is prayer. But one by one, we are letting go of the power loss. You're not letting go of the situation, which may or may not need to be handled. There really are challenging situations, but the power loss is not the situation. It's our interpretation. The fear is the sickness. The situation's just the situation. And we're human. We're never going to not have a situation. So we're praying away how it's taking our power. We're praying away the upset. We're letting go of the upset. So that part of the personal daily practice must be there. And on top of that, we need to get more power. So we have to put on the map this movement towards authenticity, which is God's voice. All the principles I mentioned, but authenticity is who we are and how we show up once we're no longer managing what we're getting or suffering. This simple concept is the basic premise of the 12-step work. I'm just summing it up very simply, but it's up to you, should you need to do it, to take action on that. The Reset Food Plan is going to address the physiology behind the addiction, but it's up to each individual to start a daily practice to deal with the spiritual aspect of addiction if you need to do that. Now, for some people, if they're seriously stuck in the throes of addiction, you might need to postpone the Reset Food Plan until you are more spiritually healthy. You're more spiritually full of power, full of motivation. See, if you're not losing power and you're not worried and upset, you feel more excited. You have more power left over to apply yourself to a food plan or to serving others or some bigger picture or some creative act, which is really the plan. Now, during that time period, should you be so stuck with addiction to where you just need to do the daily practice for a while, during that time, we're also going to be treating the underlying cause with the custom herbal formulas and the clinical nutrition. So it's very important that if you need Reset Food Plan and you're too sick to do it spiritually and with addiction, that you do your daily practice spiritually and that you take your prescription as prescribed so that we can get you feeling better and good enough to one day go back to the Reset Food Plan and start that journey. I wish you all the luck. All right. Until next video. Bye.